Well, hello and welcome to Uncorking a Story. I'm your host, Mike Carlin, and today I'm pleased to introduce you to James Cruz. James is the editor of the best-selling anthology, How to Love the World, which has been featured on NPR's Morning Edition, as well as the Boston Globe and the Washington Post. He's the author of 4 prize-winning collections of poetry, The Book of What Says, Telling My Father, Bluebird, and Every Waking Moment. His poems have been published in the New York Times, Ploughshares, The New Republic, and The Sun magazine. His new collection, The Path to Kindness, offers more than 100 poems of connection and joy from a diverse range of voices. And here today to talk about that and so much more is James Cruz. Welcome to Uncorking a Story, James.
Hi, Mike. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's great to have you here. And James, I ask everyone the same question to start off, which is, James, where does your story begin?
Well, I think of what defines me the most, and that is poetry, as you might have guessed, since we're here to talk about a poetry book. And I guess my poetry story really begins with the way my parents would sit and read to me. And so I've always had this love of language. And I think of the way they would tell this story to everyone they met when I was younger. I didn't really get it or get the significance of it at the time, but they were so surprised because they would read the storybooks to me a few times. And I could then start reciting them because a lot of them were in poetry or were very rhythmic and were about the music of the language. And so I don't think I've ever actually thought about that until you asked me that question. So good question. But that is kind of like the source or the seed of my desire to both read and write poetry. Just that early desire to just inhabit the stories or have the stories inhabit me and be able to recite them back.
Yeah, it never ceases to amaze me when I hear stories like that, where authors, writers tell me, "Hey, it was a third grade teacher who kind of recognized something in me, or it was a librarian who I had a connection with, or it was my parents who were reading to me," and people just kind of remembering a love of being read to at a very young age. Do you remember what some of those, early things were that your parents were reading to you?
There was, I think there was this kid's book called But No Elephants that stands out to me. And it's like this story of this old woman who's like these animals keep coming to her house and she lets more and more in, but will never let in the elephants because it's too big. And I don't know what the significance of that story is supposed to mean exactly, but that was one book, probably Dr. Seuss, like a lot of young people.
Yeah.
Shel Silverstein was an early book that I really read. But I have to say, Mike, you mentioned like third grade teacher, and that's actually the next part of my story is, so that's ironic. The next part of my story, this is like the story I usually begin with. So you got the really behind the scenes look. The story I usually start with is my third grade teacher, Mrs. Brown, would require us to read, memorize and recite a new poem every week. And I did that for a while. That was like right up my alley, even though I was shy and introverted and, like red face, trembling voice in front of the class. But somehow I worked up the courage to ask her if I could write and recite my own poems. I will be honest, in part, I thought it would be easier to recite and memorize poems if I'd already written them. But I think it was this desire to like share something that was in me.
Wow, that takes a tremendous amount of vulnerability as a third grader to do something like that.
I don't know how I did it. I really don't.
I remember, you talk about your parents reading to you. I remember some of my earliest memories are my grandmother reading to me. So I have a twin brother. So she would read to us, but actually I wouldn't call it reading because she would just make up stories in her head and just tell them to us.
Wow.
And I did the same thing for one of my daughters. So we have 3 kids, they're triplets. And one of my daughters would always ask me to tell her stories that night. And she never wanted like a storybook. My son wanted Madeline and Harold and the Purple Crayon. I had to read those 100 times a night to him. My daughter, his sister Gracie, always wanted me to tell her a story. And I would tell her these stories about my childhood, but they were all made up. So I'd tell her these stories about, her father and Uncle Jimmy. And then like a few years ago, we're sitting around and she's like, "Dad, do you remember that story about how you and Uncle Jimmy were walking home and and he had a balloon and he let it go, and you gave him your balloon, and then you came home and his balloon was in the backyard. I'm like, yeah. She's like, did you make that up? I'm like, of course I did. She's like, she was so mad at me because she thought it was
Wow.
like a real thing, but
Yeah.
the ways we poison our children, I suppose. Um,
Or teach them creativity.
or teach them creativity. That could be the lesson there. That could be the turnaround
Yeah.
there. So when did you, so you started, I mean, as early as third grade,
Mhm.
writing your own poetry.
Yeah.
What did you want to be when you grew up?
Well, it migrated to a few different things. So initially, I wanted to be an archaeologist, which I think is interesting because a poet is still like digging deeper into things. But I, of course, like most kids, I just wanted to find dinosaur bones. And then from there, I really thought I always loved my teachers. I honestly don't think I had a bad teacher growing up, which, is really a blessing. And so I then wanted to become a teacher. And I never really thought writer or author, or certainly not poet, was like a valid career move. And so, or a valid profession. It certainly didn't sound very sexy. Archaeologist or paleontologist sounded much better.
Right.
So I think that's why I gravitated toward those things. And then later on in life, I grew up very poor. Like my parents didn't have much money at all. And so then I started saying, like, I want to be a corporate lawyer because I heard they made a lot of money or something. And like I didn't want to live in poverty anymore beyond that. But then I luckily, again, back to the teachers, I had a teacher in high school who knew that I wanted to be like go into international law or corporate law or something. And she just wouldn't have it. She wasn't having it at all. And she just teased me relentlessly. Like, really? You're gonna do that? Really? You think you're gonna go that direction? And finally, I think she teased me so much and she kind of nudged me very gently. And I saw that I really loved writing. I really saw teaching as a way to go, even though I knew that, I wasn't signing up to be a wealthy person going in those
Right.
directions. Like I wanted to choose happiness over those other concerns.
Choosing happiness. Never a bad choice.
No,
May not be
no,
great for the bank account, but
no.
never a bad choice. So you studied, then you go to college and get a teaching degree certificate.
Well, I ended up studying English and had a great professor in college. His name was David Kluhl, no longer with us, but he basically showed me what poetry could do and showed me the magic of poetry, even beyond some of those um, earlier kind of exposures to poetry. And because at that point, I still was like, I was a little caught on this money thing for a while. Like, okay, like if I'm going to be a writer, then I got to be a novelist because that's how you make the money, right? And so, which most of my novelist friends would tell me, like, okay, you were very deluded, right? That's not going to happen.
It's like, tell me where this money is because
Right.
I'm still looking for it with my novels, but
Right. Yeah. But so this professor David Kluhl, he quickly disabused me of that notion too. So again, like teachers really have had a profound effect on my life. And so I just started seeing the power of poetry. He brought in poetry that was being written by living people, really contemporary poets, and poetry that was about everyday life and that was accessible, that was understandable and relatable. And I was just coming out at the time too, as a gay man, and so he was introducing me to poetry that spoke to that and like spoke to my lived experience there. And so it really just like had this life opening effect. And then I decided to pursue poetry throughout the rest of my undergrad. And then he helped me get into grad school for creative writing, which again, not a great move for the bank account at all. But like I said, I decided to choose happiness over the money concerns. And, I've had to cut corners, but I've never had to do without something that I really wanted.
yeah.
Um, yeah.
So kind of choosing happiness. In what ways does writing poetry bring you happiness?
Well, as a more shy and kind of introverted person, I've as a teacher, I've developed that ability to kind of, turn on the extroversion and then like go deep and recharge. But as someone who's still pretty essentially introverted, I think it gives me a chance to just slow down, pause, get more grounded in my experience. And I really use it as part of my spiritual practice. It is like a mindfulness practice for me. It's about capturing something that happened the day before, that in the busyness and craziness of our lives, we don't always hold on to, or, letting a memory bubble up. Just like, for instance, about my father, who I lost when I was pretty young, about 20 years old. And memories of him have been bubbling up for years. And poetry has been a great way to honor his memory and to kind of give voice to these memories that have helped me through the grieving process as well. And so in that way, you wouldn't think like, oh, that leads to happiness if you're writing about grief. But it does allow me to process those things. And I think the fact that I've always had some way of getting what I'm feeling or getting what's going on with me onto the page and out of myself and out of my body, probably like a lot of people, it's been a great gift. And it's been this kind of practice and ritual that I've been able to turn to. So it has brought a lot of pleasure and joy, especially when I'm able to turn off that inner critic or the doubt. And when I cannot focus on when I can focus on the process of it and enjoying that instead of the product, as like, oh, this poem will get published in so and so, which pays this much. It's like I can't think about any of that when I'm in the midst of the creative process. Just have to like,
Yeah, you don't want that. You don't want that business side to get in the way, that practical side to get in the way of creativity. And as you're talking about sort of, writing about the thing that happened yesterday, or even, memory or reflections on your father, to me that speaks to like just the innate curiosity that that is required to do something like that. And I do find that writers, authors, they're very curious people. And it's almost like, I'd like to say you have to have the time to write, you have to have the talent to write, but you also have to have the curiosity to really explore these things. What's your take on curiosity for writers, poets, authors?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. I've never thought of it quite in those terms, Mike, but I think it's great to outline, time, space, talent, but also curiosity, which is to me a kind of openness to experience. And it really figures into my writing. I think another reason I love poetry so much is that it tends to be broken into lines, and it allows me to be present at a level that we seldom are in our lives. So I'm present to each new line, and I've tried to train myself to be open to being surprised by whatever comes next without judging it, without doubting it or fearing it. And that's been really useful because that kind of tends to bleed into my own life. So I can be surprised by things that happen to me, or be open to certain experiences that I wouldn't normally be open to. And the other thing, when you were talking about that, I thought about what Elizabeth Gilbert says about curiosity, how it's much more reliable than passion. Like we always tell people, like, follow your passion. And for her, she says curiosity is much more reliable because it will lead you. You will be drawn to something.
Yeah. I find, passions, you can be fleeting.
Yeah.
They come in and out of, I can speak for myself there. I'm passionate about something one day, and then the next day I'm not. And if you embrace your passions too much as a career, you might not enjoy them as much anymore. But the curiosity is it's innate. It's always there. And you need to, I've found that whenever I followed it, it's always sort of paid off for me anyway. Not monetarily per se, but certainly maybe in a more spiritual sense. I'm curious about, you talk about happiness and choosing happiness, which I think is beautiful. But the title is of your latest collection is The Path to Kindness. So I'm curious as to what sort of moved you or spurred you to, focus this collection on a path to kindness.
Yeah. Well, and it's also poems of connection and joy. So I got joy in there, which is, kind of the deepest form of happiness, I think. But for me, the kindness piece was important with this collection because I just had the sense that as we are emerging from a pandemic and all the difficulties of the past few years and just the everyday difficulties of life compounded by that, um, that we needed reminders of how to connect with each other again and how to come together. And, I think poetry has this magical quality of kind of giving us just enough of what we need to tune in a little more deeply to our lives. Because I think, kindness can happen in really, really small ways. And it can be the smile or wave someone gives you when you're passing them by on the road, or and just like a few kind words with a barista at the coffee shop. It's all these little ways. But if you're caught up in the rush of your day, if you're just caught up in everything you have to do with your task list in your head, um, you're probably not going to be as present to those moments, and maybe even have as wide a definition of what kindness is. So with this collection too, I wanted kindness between people, maybe kindness with the natural world, but also kindness to ourselves. And self-care has become a little bit of a cliche term nowadays, but it's still really important. And I think, it's really hard to be kind and open, curious to the world if you're not first being kind to yourself and taking care of your needs. And so that is a big piece that I hope people will carry away from this.
And I mean, I do love the focus on kindness because I think we are in an increasingly unkind world. We almost have to search for kindness,
Mhm.
and I say that as somebody who every now and then makes the mistake of going on Twitter, um, and just seeing how unkind people can be
Mhm.
to each other, to people who we've never met, who don't
Yeah.
really know us, who are reacting to something that someone says, and just because it's different than how someone else might feel, it's like the vilification of like our fellow human beings. To me, is like it makes me cringe.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I don't make the mistake of going on Twitter. I am on social media like Facebook and Instagram mostly. Um, but I don't go on Twitter. And I think, people are saying things that they would never say to someone's face, or very
yeah,
few people would do that.
yeah.
And so yeah, I think we need that. And when I was starting to put this book together, it's when we were starting to come out of the pandemic. And I was hearing a lot of stories about people being terrible to each other on planes. And so it's like we just need to like learn how to connect again. And so my lens of seeing the world is through poetry. And so I'm just trying to do my little part and reminding people, because I think kindness is our basic human nature. We just forget about it. It gets covered up in busyness, distraction, and culturally acceptable ways of like taking people down or canceling people, and without really listening.
Yeah, I mean, just observing my kids are 20 years old now. But when they were babies, I used to observe them play, and they were all about kindness. I mean, they were
Mm,
sharing, they were laughing with each other. They loved to be around each other. And then something happens when they start socialization.
mm,
Something happens to us all where creativity kind of goes by the wayside a little bit.
yeah.
Attitudes come. Um, but one thing you were mentioning, kind of coming out of the pandemic and within the pandemic, so many people had, were experiencing, I would say, depression and anxiety
Mhm.
because we couldn't connect with other people. And I think that's whether you're introverted or outroverted. This inability to see other people in person. I mean, we do these things over Zoom and social media and all that stuff, but um, there's really no substitute for a true connection with somebody like in the same time and space as other people. And I think we're all learning how to do that again.
We are, yeah, and just learning how to socialize, and I think even just how to say yes to those experiences again, because probably a lot of us got used to the other way of doing things, and now we're kind of emerging from that. So we have to get used to the other way, but we're all changed by what happened. and we're all different people. And I think we're all sort of in this weird grieving process right now, that collectively, and so we need kindness more than ever, and ways of showing up for each other that are maybe a little deeper than just like, how are you? Great. Oh, great. Okay, fine. Just like, okay, what's really going on? Like you know, asking for the story behind the person or behind the story, delving a little bit deeper. So my hope is that, these poems, poetry, which tends to drill a little bit deeper, can invite that kind of connection with ourselves and with other people. And throughout the pandemic, I was surprised to find that as I was looking for these poems in this book, I started becoming more attuned to these small kindnesses that would show up. Like even while I was masked, even when I was just like, my trip to the grocery store would be, one of the few trips out into the world in the week. And so I was hyper attuned to everything. And even just a few kind words from the cashier would mean the world. And it just got me thinking, like, it really doesn't take much for us to come back to that and to offer that to someone else, to receive that. And so I just started writing these little moments down. And that's part of the reason I wanted to include these reflective pauses that happen throughout the book, so that people could be invited to write about their experience, even if they don't consider themselves poets or writers, even just to journal about it. I think it's really powerful when we recreate a moment that happened to us. We then get to live it again and again and again. If we revisit that moment,
Yeah.
it helps us hold on to it a little longer.
Yeah, I mean, journaling is, can be a very powerful tool. Especially, and I know a lot of people who listen to this are writers and aspiring writers. But that's some words of advice that I constantly hear from people who really, are successful in the field and do it for a living, which is, hey, write every day,
Mhm.
journal your experiences. It's a way of kind of getting in touch with who you are, and it's a way of finding your voice. Is journaling something you do every day?
It is, yeah. Sometimes more than others, but I don't beat myself up if I have to miss a day, because life does get busy sometimes. But I do it almost every day. It's the first thing I do when I wake up, besides make coffee, then go journal, and then I think for me, journaling, my very plain notebook with the pen, is this safe place where I can go and just free write, do this automatic writing that I love doing. And it's very low stakes. Like, I don't judge it. I don't judge what comes. But there's a kind of magic that happens with that too. Sometimes a poem will pop out because I am a poet, but not always. And what surprises me the most is whether it's something that wants to be dealt with in my life, or like a new project idea or something like that. Whatever wants to be known within you will keep popping up in your journaling. And so after a while, you can't say no to it anymore. And I think that's the magic of checking in with yourself every day, because you're like, wow, for the last 5 days, I've written about wanting to reach out to so and so to like rekindle that relationship. Maybe I should listen to that. Maybe I should do that
Yeah.
today.
Yeah.
So it can be really powerful in that way too, just personally.
Well, I do like to inspire my listeners here on Uncorking a Story, and I'm curious if you could share a poem from the latest collection that might help inspire some of our listeners to share a small kindness.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think what I'll share is just the poem Small Kindnesses by Denisha Lamaris. And this is a poem that went viral a few years ago, right after the 2016 election, probably burned into a lot of our minds as yet another very consequential election. And I just think this is a powerful poem in helping us to pay attention to those small kindnesses when they do arise. So this is Small Kindnesses by Denisha Lamaris. I've been thinking about the way when you walk down a crowded aisle, people pull in their legs to let you by, or how strangers still say bless you when someone sneezes, a leftover from the bubonic plague. Don't die, we are saying. And sometimes when you spill lemons from your grocery bag, someone else will help you pick them up. Mostly, we don't want to harm each other. We want to be handed our cup of coffee hot and to say thank you to the person handing it, to smile at them and for them to smile back, for the waitress to call us honey when she sets down the bowl of clam chowder, and for the driver in the red pickup truck to let us pass. We have so little of each other now, so far from tribe and fire, only these brief moments of exchange. What if they are the true dwelling of the holy, these fleeting temples we make together when we say, here, have my seat, go ahead, you first, I like your hat.
Wow. The only objection I have to that is the mention of clam chowder, because I just, could never rally around it. Conch
We,
chowder, maybe.
we are on the same page, Mike. I do not enjoy me some clam chowder.
It's I would not put it on my list of things that I would want served to me, but no,
right.
it is a beautiful, beautiful sentiment. And just those small kindnesses we can share with each other, really captures that very well.
Yeah, and it's a great exercise, actually. I often, when I'm working with newer writers or younger writers, I feel like this poem is a great one to share, and then to invite them to just make like a kindness list, a list of like these little moments that they've experienced throughout the past week or couple of weeks. And people almost always have something to say, and it can be really surprising.
Yeah, and to be able to reflect on those and manifest those versus all the sort of negative stuff that we also observe, so
That's
often
right.
every day.
Yeah.
Well, I have some. I call these the hot seat questions. I ask these of everybody, and again, they're kind of just again another way of getting to know my guests a little bit more. But starting with, James, what were some of your favorite TV shows when you were a child?
Okay, this is embarrassing. I really liked this TV show. I don't even know why, but it was called Small Wonder.
Oh,
Do you remember that
she's
show?
a small one. I can't sing for shit.
But
But I know the theme song off yeah, she was like a little robot, right? Wasn't
so
she a little
this,
robot?
yeah, the
Yeah,
scientist's
totally.
father
Yeah.
made a robot daughter, which
Yeah.
like would not fly today. This is like very
No.
disturbing stuff. But she was a robot, and my brother and I just loved that show. Like I think it would come on at like 2 p.m. every day on, I don't know, channel 11 or something. And we just like were tuned in. And so that was one. Um, when I was a little older, there was this cartoon on Nickelodeon called Ren and Stimpy. I don't know
Oh
if
my gosh. Don't whiz on the electric fence.
yeah.
I remember. I remember that was
So
hysterical, that
on
cartoon.
the raunchier side of things, slightly. But yeah,
Happy,
that
Happy, Joy, Joy was the song they would sing,
right.
though. I mean, that is not
Right.
too dissimilar from some of the stuff we're talking about today.
Oh my God, Ren and Stimpy planted the seed of what I'm going to be doing for my whole life.
Yeah, I mean, they should be in the acknowledgments of something here.
In the next printing, we're going to have to change that. Absolutely. What else? I'm just trying to think if there's anything else that really stands out. Um, that's all I can think of at the moment.
Yeah, those are two good answers. Yeah,
Yeah.
earlier today I heard Wonder Woman, Love Boat, and Fantasy Island. So it's a nice pivot from those old standbys, which come
Yeah,
up more frequently than people might imagine on the show.
that's
But never had Ren
interesting.
and Stimpy before, so I'm happy to hear that.
Yes.
And
Yes.
Small Wonder, God, I have not thought of that show in 100 years.
It's a bizarre show.
Bizarre, definitely a bizarre show. All right. So if we are going into your playlist, whether on Spotify, Apple, whatever, what artists would we find you listening to more than others?
Gosh, also slightly embarrassing. I was just listening to Lady Gaga yesterday. Um, there's this band, I think they're Canadian, Great Lake Swimmers. I really love their work. I'm not a very hip person when it comes to music, so I usually rely on my husband to have like the good playlists. Mumford and Sons is a pretty good, solid person that I turn to. Yeah, I think those are some of my main ones.
All right, all good answers there. I Gaga, loved her in House of Gucci. I thought she was
Mm.
great in that. And of course, A Star Is Born too.
Yeah, I love that movie.
That was. I mean, it's such a sad, dark ending, but great performances all around. Um, okay, getting more literary here. How do you feel when you're staring at a blank piece of paper or a blank computer screen, depending on how you write? What experiences go when there's nothing in front of you?
I'm really happy to be staring at a blank notebook page. I mean, that feels like a fresh start to me. The blinking cursor on a computer screen is a little more intimidating, but there is something comforting in that blankness and that emptiness that's just waiting to be filled. So I feel a real sense of possibility.
All right. If you could sit down with that third grade teacher of yours, who lets you, write that poem and perform it in front of your class, what would you like to say to that person?
I would say a huge thank you for encouraging me and for just trusting in me to write my own poem, to be able to recite it, and for really changing the trajectory of my life. I mean, I owe her so much, and I have tried to track her down actually, to no avail. I'm not sure she's still with us, but I just, yeah, from the bottom of my heart, I have to thank her.
And how about that high school teacher who convinced you not to go into
Oh,
the business law world?
I have been in touch with her through Facebook, that magical medium, and so I would just say to her, "You were absolutely right. I am not cut out for business, law, or any other office-related work. I discovered that early enough, and just thank you for helping me to see what I was called to do, both teaching, writing, and being a writer myself."
And last but not least, what words of advice would you give your younger self? Let's say you could mail your younger self a letter, and that the younger self would get it, open it up, and read letter from James in the future. What would you tell your younger self?
Probably write in all capital letters. Please stop judging everything you do. Please stop worrying about whether it's right or wrong. Listen to yourself, trust yourself, and don't compare your experience with other people's experiences. Your journey, your experience is completely your own. And so you are the best judge of what feels right to you. So don't doubt your own kind of lived experience and your own intuition.
Yeah, I hear so many different answers to that question, but one of the common themes I hear is worry less.
Yeah,
Don't
yeah,
worry so much. Yeah, it's
absolutely.
beautiful sentiment. I lied. There's one more question. Where can people find out more about your poetry and the path to kindness?
Well, one of the best ways, actually, I'm on Instagram and I post a lot of poems and prompts and things like that. So I'm at james.cruz.poet, and also on Facebook, not on Twitter. Don't look for me on Twitter. You can go to my website, jamescruz.net. You can sign up for weekly poems and prompts to show up in your email box. And you can find the books, The Path to Kindness, How to Love the World, wherever books are sold. And I usually encourage people to try out your local independent bookstore first, because they have been so supportive in getting these books out into the world.
All right, very good. James, thank you so much for coming by and talking to me, telling me about your life, and telling me all about the path to kindness, poems of connection and joy. I really appreciate the time we spent together.
It's been my pleasure, Mike. Thank you so much.